I often find myself standing in the heart of modern cities, craning my neck to look up at the towering monoliths of glass and steel that scrape the sky. There is something undeniably awe-inspiring about these structures. They are testaments to human ingenuity, symbols of our relentless drive to reach higher, to conquer our environment, and to carve our names into the bedrock of history. Yet, beneath the admiration, a quiet question usually stirs within me. What is the true nature of this endless upward striving? This hunger for legacy and permanence is not a modern phenomenon. It is an ancient ache, one that traces its roots back to the very dawn of human civilization and to a single, often overlooked man. When we think of the great villains of historical and religious texts, our minds typically conjure images of monstrous beasts, demonic entities, or bloodthirsty warlords wreaking overt havoc. But history's most profound villains rarely introduce themselves with horns and pitchforks. More often than not, they arrive wearing the cloak of progress, offering security, order, and a grand vision for the future. In the biblical narrative, the archetype of this sophisticated defiance is established in a mere 4 verses, tucked away in a dry genealogical ledger in the book of Genesis. Genesis 10, verses 8 through 11, introduces us to Nimrod, the man who built Babylon. These 4 verses do not describe a monster. They describe a hero of the ancient world, a visionary who fundamentally altered the trajectory of human organization. To understand Nimrod is to understand the inception of the empire, the birth of the metropolis, and the original blueprint for systemic rebellion against the divine order. He is the Bible's foundational villain, not because he destroyed the world, but because he tried to replace it with one entirely of his own making. By examining this brief passage, we can peel back the layers of antiquity to reveal a psychological and sociological profile that remains startlingly relevant today. We begin to see that the story of Nimrod is not just a dusty artifact of ancient Mesopotamia. It is the origin story of the human ego magnified to an industrial scale, an ideology that continues to echo through every civilization that has dared to build a tower to the heavens. To truly grasp the magnitude of what Nimrod accomplished and why it was so insidious, I realize we must first step outside the immediate text and immerse ourselves in the psychological landscape of the post-flood world. The generations following the Great Deluge were living in the shadow of an unimaginable trauma. The collective memory of humanity was scarred by the realization that nature could rise up and wipe out nearly everything breathing. Imagine the lingering terror, the way a sudden darkening of the sky or a heavy downpour might have sent shivers of existential dread through the surviving families. The divine mandate given to Noah and his descendants was clear and expansive. Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth. The instruction was to spread out, to cultivate the globe, to trust in the provision and protection of the Creator while living in harmony with the natural world. But trauma breeds a desperate desire for control. The psychological instinct of a traumatized populace is rarely to scatter and explore. It is to huddle together, to build walls, to create artificial environments where they can dictate the terms of their own survival. Humanity was paralyzed by the fear of being scattered and destroyed again. Enter Nimrod. He did not rise to power by simply subjugating people with the sword. He rose by answering their deepest, unspoken fears. He understood the psychology of the masses. Where the divine voice called for expansive trust, Nimrod offered concentrated security. He became the architect of a new social contract. Trade your individual autonomy and your reliance on the unseen God for the collective strength and visible protection of the city walls. I find it deeply sobering to reflect on how often in history authoritarian systems, and impenetrable fortresses are built not upon the foundation of pure malice, but upon the fertile ground of public anxiety. Nimrod capitalized on the vulnerability of a generation that felt entirely too small in a world that had proven to be terrifyingly immense. He gave them a reason to stay put, a project to unite them, and a system that promised they would never again be at the mercy of the elements or the divine whim. In doing so, he hijacked the human narrative, shifting it from a story of stewardship over the earth to a story of dominion over each other. The biblical text begins its character study with a precise linguistic choice. Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. The Hebrew word translated as mighty warrior or mighty one is Gibor. While it can denote bravery and valor, in this specific context, theological and historical scholars often point out that it carries the darker connotation of a tyrant, a despot, or one who enforces his will through dominance. Nimrod is noted as the first to become a gibber on the earth after the flood. This signifies a monumental shift in human sociology. Before Nimrod, the social structure was largely patriarchal and tribal, extended families led by elders. Nimrod introduced the concept of the monarch, the centralized ruler who demands allegiance not by bloodline, but by power and statecraft. The text repeats the word mighty and couples it with the title hunter. In the context of ancient Near Eastern culture, particularly in Mesopotamia, the motif of the king as a hunter is ubiquitous. Royal reliefs from Assyria and Babylon frequently depict monarchs slaying lions to demonstrate their prowess, their divine right to rule, and their ability to protect their subjects from chaotic forces. However, many ancient commentators and linguistic traditions suggest a more sinister interpretation. Nimrod was a hunter of men. His prey was the independence of wandering tribes. He hunted souls, bringing them under his dominion. And he did this before the Lord. The phrasing here in Hebrew implies an in-your-face defiance. It is not before the Lord, in a posture of worship or submission, but rather in the face of the Lord, standing in direct, arrogant opposition. It is the posture of a man who looks at the heavens and declares himself an equal, if not a superior, force. When I think about this, I am struck by the insidious nature of the personality cult. Nimrod represents the moment humanity decided that if they could no longer trust the invisible sovereign, they would manufacture a visible, flesh and blood deity to revere. The tyrant becomes the savior. By establishing himself as the ultimate protector and the unrivaled power, Nimrod effectively replaced God in the daily consciousness of his people, becoming the focal point of a new, centralized religion of the state. The narrative then moves from the man to his machinery, outlining the blueprint of his empire. The centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in Shinar. Here, we witness the birth of the metropolis. But to understand the true rebellion of these cities, particularly Babylon, and the subsequent project of the Tower of Babel, we have to look horizontally at the technology of the time. The foundational shift was in the building materials. Prior to this, altars and monuments were built with natural stone, uncut, unique, shaped by the forces of nature and, by extension, God. But the builders of Babylon declared, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. This is not just an architectural footnote, it is a profound philosophical statement. A stone is unique. It cannot be forced into a perfect, uniform mold. A brick is a product of mass production. It is standardized, identical to every other brick, and stripped of its individual character. To build a massive, towering empire, you cannot use irregular stones. You need uniform bricks. Nimrod's system required the standardization of humanity. People were no longer unique individuals created in a divine image. They became interchangeable cogs, identical bricks baked in the kiln of society, mortared together by tar, bitumen, a sticky, dark substance drawn from the earth, replacing the natural mud or clay. The city of Babylon, which in its native tongue meant Gate of the Gods, but in Hebrew is associated with Babel, meaning confusion, was the ultimate expression of human secular humanism. The goal was to build a closed system, a self-sustaining ecosystem that required no grace, no rain from heaven, and no intervention from above. They wanted to build a tower whose top reached the heavens, not to commune with God, but to usurp the divine vantage point, to make a name for ourselves. This technological and architectural leap was a deliberate severing of the umbilical cord between creation and creator. They replaced the providence of nature with the predictability of the brick, establishing an artificial reality where human engineering was the ultimate savior. The ghost of Nimrod did not vanish when the walls of ancient Babylon eventually crumbled into the dust of modern-day Iraq. If we trace the concept of Babylon horizontally across the entire span of the biblical text and human history, we see that it evolved from a literal city into a pervasive, enduring ideology. In ancient Mesopotamian mythos, figures like Gilgamesh echo the Nimrod archetype, kings driven by an obsessive fear of death and insignificance, seeking immortality not through spiritual purity, but through the monumental works of human hands, like the Great Walls of Uruk. Babylon became the biblical shorthand for the world system in rebellion against the divine order. From the prophets who condemned its exploitative economic systems, to the Book of Revelation, which depicts Babylon the Great as a seductive, overarching empire of commerce and luxury built on the souls of men, the spirit of Nimrod remains the constant antagonist. It represents the perpetual human temptation to find ultimate security, identity, and salvation in our own constructs. When I observe the modern world, I cannot help but see the blueprints of Shinar being unrolled once again. Our contemporary towers of Babel are no longer constructed with baked mud and tar. They are built with lines of code, artificial intelligence, global financial networks, and algorithms designed to predict, manage, and uniformize human behavior. We still seek to create closed, invincible systems. We still suffer from the illusion that if we just gather enough data, build a high enough technological wall, and centralize enough power, we can finally banish the chaos of existence and make a name for ourselves. The methods have evolved, but the underlying psychology remains identical to the traumatized, ambitious builders of the ancient plains. The system still demands bricks, standardized consumers, and compliant participants, rather than unique stones. The villainy of Babylon is not that it is inherently chaotic, but that it imposes a suffocating, artificial order that slowly starves the human soul of its need for the transcendent. In the end, these 4 verses in Genesis 10 serve as much more than a historical registry. They are the earliest warning beacon regarding the dark side of human civilization. Nimrod, the mighty hunter, stands as the prototype of every demagogue who has ever traded on fear to build an empire. He teaches us that the greatest threats to human flourishing do not always look like destruction. Sometimes they look like unprecedented progress, grand architecture, and impenetrable security. The villain of this story is the very system of self-reliance that elevates human achievement to the status of a deity. As I navigate through the concrete and digital landscapes of our time, the story of the man who built Babylon feels less like ancient history and more like a mirror. It forces a quiet, uncomfortable introspection. The spirit of Nimrod is not just out there in the geopolitical machinations of empires. It is a tendency within the human heart. It is the desire to control, to isolate, and to build monuments to our own egos. We are all builders in the span of our lifetimes. The enduring question left in the wake of Babylon's ruins is this: what exactly are we using our days to construct? Are we building inner temples of character that rely on a grace beyond ourselves, living as unique, uncut stones in harmony with the natural and divine order? Or are we frantically baking bricks, trying to construct our own personal towers of Babel to secure our names and insulate ourselves from the vulnerabilities of life, only to eventually find ourselves isolated, confused, and speaking a language no one else understands? The choice between the open fields of trust and the walled city of control is the oldest choice in the world, and it is one we make every single day.